Episode 144 of CppCast, recorded April 1st, 2018. This episode of CppCast is sponsored by JetBrains, maker of intelligent development tools to simplify your challenging tasks and automate the routine ones. JetBrains is offering a 25% discount for an individual license on the C++ tool of your choice, CLion, Resharper C++, or AppCode. Use the coupon code JetBrains for CppCast during checkout at www.jetbrains.com. In this episode, Jason and I catch up on some news. We discuss some April Fool's shenanigans with pointers. And we digest more trip reports from Jacksonville and other news. Welcome to episode 144 of CppCast, the only podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So we're both on the road again this week, right?
Yes, but we did not want to miss making another episode.
Exactly. We were supposed to have a different episode out this week, but unfortunately a guest had something come up, so we're going to have them rescheduled for a couple weeks from now, hopefully, and we decided to do an episode between the two of us.
Yes, and I apologize if my audio sounds weird. I am using not my normal headset, and I'm in a very echoey room, but hopefully we can fix that in post-processing.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to figure it out and get rid of some of this echo, but if not, then we apologize for the audio quality of this episode. Okay. Well, at the top of every episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week we got an email from Johan Lundberg, and he wrote in, thank you for the great podcast. Here are some ideas for guests. And he suggested Vladimir Vondras, who works on Magnum.graphics, and it looks like that's a pretty interesting gaming middleware platform. Yeah, so that could definitely be a good topic for an episode. And then he also recommended John Lakos, and I'm surprised we haven't already asked John Lakos to be on the show, or maybe we have and I just forgot about it. But we should definitely have John Lakos on.
I don't think we have invited him on, and I'll almost certainly see him in Aspen, and if we don't talk to him before then, which is our friendly reminder that if you have not registered for C++ now yet, it is a good time to register. You can meet neat people like John Lakos.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, I mentioned this at the end of last week's episode, but we're doing a listener survey. So if you want to give us some feedback about the show so that we can hopefully make the show even better, you can go to bit.ly CppCast survey. That's bit.ly/CppCast survey. We've already gotten about 250 responses, but we're hoping to see some more.
I was just going to ask, 250 is pretty good. Do you have now a time limit for when we want to cut off responses, or are you just going to leave it open indefinitely?
I think I'm just going to leave it open. But yeah, we'd like to see a couple more responses maybe after this episode when more people hear about it right now.
Yeah, because we've only announced it on Twitter so far, right?
We announced it on Twitter, and I put just a little comment about it in the bumper of last week's episode.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, since we don't have a guest today, we're just going to go over some news, and since we do have 2 weeks worth of stuff that's gone on, there's still been plenty of trip reports coming out of Jacksonville. There's plenty to talk about, right, Jason?
Yes, particularly our top news items.
Yeah, so the first one, we're recording this episode on April 2nd, making yesterday April Fool's Day. And it looks like there may have been some collaboration amongst some C++ bloggers, because I'm seeing 3 different articles on 3 different blogs all talking about how raw pointers are going to be gone in C++ 20 and 23.
I think it was at least 3. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 4 or 5 from what I saw on Twitter.
Yeah. So the first one we have is Bartholomew Flippick, and his post was titled Deprecating Raw Pointers in C++ 20, saying they're going to be deprecated in 20 and then completely gone in 23. And then we have No New from Rainier Grimm. And his post actually wasn't dated April 1st. So I was a little confused by that one. But he refers to the third post we have, which is C++ will no longer have pointers by Fluent C++, as a reference. So I'm assuming that this is still an April Fool's joke and not him just writing based on a different blog he read, saying that they were being deprecated. Yeah.
Yeah, so, Fluent C++ is Jonathan's, and he published his on April 1st, no question. And then we have, I think Arna might have also done a April Fool's post.
Oh, okay, I missed that one.
I'm not sure, but it was several for sure.
Yeah, and they all pointed out, saying it's an April Fool's joke and everything, but maybe it's not such a bad idea to deprecate raw pointers, and they have deprecated auto pointer in the past and in favor of unique pointer and shared pointer. I don't know. What do you think, Jason?
In my world, the only point where a raw pointer still has meaning is a optional single object parameter. Mm-hmm. And I don't like using standard optional in those cases necessarily, because standard optional is a value thing. It requires you to copy or move the object into the optional to pass that in. Right. So if you have something that's legitimately an optional parameter, then there might be still a place for pointers. But for the most part, yeah, I've pretty much deprecated them from my code.
Yeah. Could they ever really be truly deprecated from C++? Because that would mean library writers could no longer make their own, smart pointer objects.
Yeah, it would be pretty much impossible. You wouldn't even be able to implement something like a vector or something where you need to reuse the storage that's been already pre-allocated.
Right.
I don't think.
So I don't think we'll ever see any of these posts any day but April Fool's Day.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. And I also saw that actually last year around this time we read one of Bartek's April Fool's posts last year, and it was talking about the C++ 18 release. So,
and I never think about April Fool's Day, really.
I kind of look forward to it. I look forward to seeing all the weird stuff that, tech companies put out. It can be kind of funny.
Did you see Elon Musk saying that Tesla was filing for bankruptcy, April Fool's?
No, I did not see that.
I thought that's kind of funny and also terribly irresponsible.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Okay, well, that's the only April Fool's joke post we have. So the next one is a real one, and this is HPX 1.1.0 is being released. And it seems like this is a pretty big release, and it's been 10 years since the project first started. So it's a pretty big milestone for them.
Yeah, 10 years is a long time to be maintaining any project at all, so congratulations to them.
Yeah. And they have fixed over 150 issues since the last release, which I guess was the 1.0 release. And there are a couple big things in here. The main point, I think, is that they now almost completely implement all of the parallel algorithms specified by the C++ 17 standard.
Which makes them what? Only them and Intel currently have
the parallel algorithms.
Yeah.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't HPX kind of offer their implementation to some of the other standard library writers?
Intel offered their implementation.
Intel offered. Okay, that's right.
HPX has arguably been the proof of concept for many of these parallel algorithms to prove that they, made sense to put into the standard, I think.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you wanted to call out with this one, Jason?
I think our listeners might be interested to see that it has it looks like some more configurability for you to control which cores are used.
Right.
If I understand this correctly, so that you can then play nicer in an environment that's using HPX and OpenMP or MPI or some other thread pool parallelization library at the same time, and they're not competing for cores.
Yeah, that seems like it would be helpful. Okay. Next one is a trip report, and this is kind of a combined trip report from someone who went to both EMBO++ and the Jacksonville committee meeting. I'm sorry, who was the author of this one? Did you catch that, Jason?
It says Ben Craig. I'm not entirely sure who that is, though, unfortunately.
Well, this is a pretty interesting trip report because it mostly kind of centers around, obviously, his impression on some of the talks he went to at EMBO++, but also about his proposal, which is P0829, the freestanding proposal. And he kind of admits that that's not the best name for the talk. But it sounds like what this basically is defining like a minimum subset of the C++ standard that embedded platforms will actually make use of. And I guess the idea is to kind of wall it off and show some separation between what is in this minimal subset and what is in the rest of the C++ standard.
Right. I find this interesting. I did not spend time going through the actual proposal. I did read the trip report, though.
Yeah, I looked a little bit at his slides because he has put his slides from his EMBO++ talk, which was about his proposal. And he goes into a little bit of detail in those slides about what would be in the, in the freestanding proposal versus what's in the full standard library. And it's interesting because he's both suggesting that some things that are already considered freestanding aren't really, and there are some things that are in the rest of the standard library that could be in the freestanding and should be in the freestanding library.
Yeah, I don't spend a lot of like actual real time in the embedded world, but when I play with these things, I compile and then I say, oh, oops, that like called some OS system call that I can't support in this particular environment. So I'll just do that a different way. So it would be kind of cool to have some way to block this off. But the main thing that he says he got pushback from the committee, which I'm honestly very curious about because I don't fully understand, that they did not like his choice to leave out unique pointer and variant visit specifically. And I don't understand why those were left out, and I want to know what the reasoning was.
Did he go into that? I think I'm trying to read back that part of his trip report to see if he could explain why he decided to leave out unique pointer. Oh, he's saying it's because it's due to compile time dependency?
Yeah.
But he's saying in practice there is no runtime dependency if you're using it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I would like to understand exactly what he means by that.
So looking at the paper also, it does mention that unique pointer, generally speaking, is around the heap. And it sounds like the freestanding thing wants to avoid the heap altogether. Right. Oh, and visit can throw if variant is valueless, which is why...
And they want to avoid exceptions.
They want to avoid exceptions and avoid the heap. But yeah, that's really tricky because, again, the fact that a variant can be valueless is one of these really weird things anyhow, this valueless by exception state of variant. Mm-hmm. And if you throw in things like unique pointer, using it just as a way to manage RAII of objects and not actually allocate on the heap, or if you take into account Clang's ability to do heap elision, those are both things that you definitely can use safely in this embedded environment.
Right. It definitely seems like this proposal makes sense, especially as we're starting to do more with the standard library. I mean, like file system is in there now, and obviously that's a very OS dependent feature of the standard library. They're not going to use we're not going to be able to use. And I'm sure we're going to continue adding more and more features that kind of fit in that realm of requiring some OS support.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. File system. I mean, clearly that has exceptions and everything else throughout.
Yeah.
Probably heap allocation for path objects would have to have heap allocation. But at the same time, to be able to have like a standard file system interface, even on your embedded device, to be able to access like some resource that was compiled into Flash or something, would be pretty darn cool. But I'm guessing that would be an insurmountable goal to try to make it all the file system shoehorned into that kind of thing.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to mention from this report? I know I am kind of looking forward to seeing the EMBO++ talks go online, which I do think is going to happen. One talk he mentioned was Simon Brand having a keynote in which he talked about what we mean when we say zero overhead and zero cost. Yeah. And it sounds like an interesting talk, yeah.
It definitely does. And Odin, I believe, put the talks up last year. I assume that he's planning to do it this year.
Okay, we'll have to look out for that and announce it and put a link in the show notes when those do go live, assuming they will. Okay, next one, another trip report, and this was from Guy Davidson for the Jacksonville C++ meeting. And he talking both about the 2D graphics proposal, which he's done a lot of work on, and also the circular buffer paper. And he, sounds like he's doing well, the circular buffer proposal. I think we talked a little bit about that with Patrice Roy 2 weeks ago. But the 2D graphics proposal will definitely hit some snags at this Jacksonville meeting. And I really feel for Guy because it sounds pretty heartbreaking the way he's describing how the proposal was treated at the working group meeting this year.
Yeah, but that sounded like there was some people who are genuinely concerned to make sure that they followed up with, okay, what does the committee want from this and how can we clarify it and everything else. Yeah,
so that's kind of the silver lining that Herb and others kind of went to him afterwards, and sounds like they're going to bring up the proposal more at Rapperswil, the next meeting. So hopefully, it still has some life in it. Although, we've definitely talked on the show ourselves about, whether or not this proposal really makes sense for standardization. It kind of sounds like that's the way the committee has been thinking, at least. That's the way they're thinking at Jacksonville. Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like he might split it into two different things. One that's linear algebra and the other that's like coordinate kind of things. So that could be, if it could be split off into more general, useful, mathy things, then I'm sure that would get much more widespread acceptance.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
But also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Also in this is that Guy had some health issues while he was trying to present in Jacksonville. So hopefully he is all recovered from that.
Yeah, in between his two papers, it sounds like he had a bit of a bug. So hopefully he's all better from that now. Yeah.
And I think also worth pointing out for those who haven't considered this, the container proposal, ring buffer, right? If accepted, would be the first container in the standard library that is thread safe, concurrent.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
That's like, all of the standard containers are thread safe for multiple readers, but to actually have something that considers, actually a container to actually use in a multi-threaded environment for like some sort of FIFO queue or something or whatever, that's, could be handy.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and next up, we had Patrice Roy on 2 weeks ago, and we realized after recording the episode, Jason, that we forgot to give him a plug and mention that he would be doing a CppCon training session.
Yeah, so it looks like Patrice will be giving a pre-conference 2-day class, and it doesn't look like all the details are public yet for all the classes that are being offered, but we talked about that with John when he was on a few weeks ago, right?
Right. And we announced just the list of all the kind of amazing presenters who were going to be doing training classes, but it didn't sound like, at least at the time, that the full list of training classes were being published yet. But hopefully that should be out soon.
Yeah, I imagine that the full thing will be public soon, but definitely look for Patrice's class, which I believe is going to be a pre-conference class, and I have a post-conference class, so you don't have to choose between the two of us. You can go to Patrice's class and then go to mine.
Exactly. Of course, you do have to choose between all the other great ones that will be available.
That is true.
Yeah. Okay. Another Jacksonville trip report, and this one was really interesting. It was from Timur Dumler, who now works for the Sea Lion team. He used to work on the Juice framework, and he gave a trip report which was kind of, had a more of a toolsy perspective, which I thought was interesting. And one of the most interesting things was he talked about the tooling study group, which we talked about with Patrice 2 weeks ago. And it does sound like he, kind of as a representative of JetBrains, will be involved in that study group, which I think is fantastic, having, IDE vendors involved in, the future of tooling for C++.
Yeah, and I love the just very first part of this, which we talked about this with Patrice, I think, that they changed how structured binding lookup works. And the fact that they go to implement this in their tools and realize, this doesn't work like people think it should work, that's perfect.
Yeah. Just having tool vendors who are actually going to go and do all this work based on what is written down in the standards, having them as part of the involved in the process makes so much sense. So I'm really glad to see that JetBrains is sending representatives, and obviously Microsoft sends plenty of representatives too. So yeah, seeing that work get done is great.
Yeah, and to address the concerns of a few guests that we've had on, they were talking about what is going to be required to make it possible for modules to work with tools. Yes, that's another thing they highlighted, that they want to make sure that whatever gets standardized with modules is toolable. So that's great to hear that they are concerned about that. We also have this comment here that now it hasn't been officially voted in, but while reviewing the new spaceship operator, they came up with some things that they might be willing to break existing the way that arithmetic conversions and comparisons work. Did you see that? I kind of glossed over it. Do you want to go into it a bit more? Day 2, let's break some code. Right. So currently, if you do a static assert of -1 greater than 1u, right, it's going to do an unsigned arithmetic comparison, or whichever way it'll do it. And that would give you, -1 is actually going to be unsigned int max. Right. Once you do a 2's complement conversion on it. And then 1u is just going to be 1. So we're going to have -1 is greater than 1. That's what currently works in C++ 17. But they're talking about breaking that in C++ 20 so that things like two-way comparisons and arithmetic conversions between enumeration types and floating points no longer would work. Deprecate two-way comparisons and arithmetic conversions between two distinct enumeration types, and when both operators are of array type, and that kind of thing. So it could potentially fix a lot of these random little gotchas in the language that we currently have to rely on compilers to give us warnings for, if we've turned those warnings on. That would be pretty awesome. Like the post says, get rid of some of C++'s warts. Yeah. Now, has not been voted in, to be clear, but could be very interesting. Yeah, definitely. Anything else you want to mention from this one? I think that's it. Stuff we already talked about with Patrice for the most part. Yeah. Okay, and then the next one is also from C-Line, and this is about their first release for the new year, which is 2018.1. And kind of the big headline features here are more C++ 17 support, more support of
of WSL, which is the Windows subsystem on Linux. So if you're running CLion on Windows, you can, compile using GCC or whatever on the subsystem and kind of connect seamlessly just the way Visual Studio does now. So that's pretty awesome. And they're also adding new language support. I didn't really know that CLion did much more than C++, but apparently they're adding Objective-C, Objective-C++, Rust, and even Fortran support.
Good old Fortran, the language that refuses to die.
Exactly.
And now, one thing that I thought was kind of awesome here, and for some reason this workflow just never crossed my mind, but you could, with CLion 2018.1, compile your project for Linux to run on your local Windows subsystem for Linux, and then run volgrind against your program there with its memcheck utility, then have all of that state come back into CLion and be able to browse through and see what memory errors you had.
That's pretty great to be able to bring valgrind into Windows using this.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing tool to be able to bring it to the Windows developers so easily. It's great. Yeah. And then I'll let you introduce this last one, Jason, CMake 3.11.
Well, CMake 3.11 was released. Nothing in particular stands out to me, except for the very top line item, which is kind of random, but TI C++ compilers are now supported by the Ninja generator.
There's Texas Instruments, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's no link here to tell you exactly what that means, but I believe it's the TI toolchain for the MSP 430 and their ARM chips. I mean, they've got several different toolchains that TI ships that are based on GCC and just customized to their particular embedded CPUs that they create. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's kind of cool that they're thinking about that kind of thing, since I sometimes play with those embedded devices.
Sure.
But no, I was looking through this and nothing else really stands out to me, although it looks like there's, every single piece of it got a little bit of help. External project has a couple of things that work better. This is interesting. Fetch content module was added, which supports populating content at configure time using any of the download and upload methods supported by external project add. So for those of us who have done fetching of resources remotely, and we've done things like hack external project add so that it doesn't actually have any build and configure commands and instead just uses it as a fetch, now we can just fetch.
That sounds nice.
It also looks like some love for the Doxygen module for generating your docs and stuff. So lots of little fixes in here.
Okay. And I spoke incorrectly when I said that was the last one. We did want to also mention this post from the Visual C++ blog. And this one isn't really a announcement of new features necessarily, but it's the post title, Configuring C++ IntelliSense and Browsing, might be a good one to bookmark if you ever are starting a new project, especially if you're using some of the newer features like the open folder or the CMake support for Visual Studio, and you want to make sure your IntelliSense works nicely, which if you're using Visual Studio, that's kind of one of the main reasons why you would want to use it, to get all the great IntelliSense. This post goes through what you might need to do to get IntelliSense working in some of those new project configurations where you do need to set up a few things more manually compared to the built-in Visual Studio projects where it should figure everything out for you.
This is where I'm slightly lost on where the utility comes in, because every time I've used CMake with Visual Studio, I use CMake to generate a Visual Studio project, and then I work with it from there. I've not yet become a fan of the use CMake folder things that have been added in the latest versions of Visual Studio. So is that where this mostly comes up when you're not using native projects? That's
my understanding, where you're using the CMake support, or you're not even using CMake and you're just opening a directory of source files that don't have Visual Studio project or don't have a CMake file. You can just open the folder and you'll be able to, write and edit your code. but you might get a bunch of squigglies because it's going to do its best to try to figure out, by just looking at your headers and everything, what you're trying to do. But if you put a little bit of time into saying, hey, I'm using this include folder, which is found over here, then Visual Studio will suddenly get a lot better with its IntelliSense.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I haven't really used the open folder either. Although this all strikes me as kind of interesting since I was recently playing with Visual Studio Code. Mm-hmm. And when you pull up any random folder full of, with a project in there in Visual Studio Code, it does a remarkably good job of just kind of figuring out what you're working on. Yeah. And then it'll actually pop up a thing down at the bottom that's like, IntelliSense or whatever it's called there would be better if you told us an include folder right now. And you're like, oh, that's a good idea. Click, type in include folder. Hey, look, it's all magically working now. I was pretty darn impressed. Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing some great things with tooling in Microsoft and being able to, just being able to do Visual Studio and CMake is just amazing. So I'm really glad they've invested their time into making this even better.
Yeah. One of the things I tell my students, particularly who are new to C++, is we're in like a heyday of tools right now. We have never had it better. Make sure you're using all of these tools as best as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I think that is it for us today, Jason. We should be back next week with an interview, and I think that's it. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Thanks so much for listening in as we chat about C++. I'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. Please let me know if we're discussing the stuff you're interested in. Or if you have a suggestion for a topic, I'd love to hear about that too. You can email all your thoughts to feedback@cppcast.com. I'd also appreciate if you like CppCast on Facebook and follow CppCast on Twitter. You can also follow me at Rob W. Irving and Jason at LeftKiss on Twitter. And of course, you can find all that info and the show notes on the podcast website at CppCast.com. Theme music for this episode is provided by podcastthemes.com. Website at CppCast.com. Theme music for this episode is provided by podcastthemes.com.